How's that for a slice of fried gold?
You think this is a fucking costume? This is a way of life.
I'll be back.
There's a flesh wound. I'm not gonna hurt you. I'm just gonna bash your brains.
Take your sticking paws off me, you damn dirty ape!
I'm sorry, Dave. I'm afraid I can't do that.
It's alive! It's alive! It's alive!
I guess everyone's entitled to one good scare, huh?
Well, hello, and welcome to Cinema Shock. This is the podcast that celebrates the stories behind your favorite cult and genre films. I'm one of your hosts, Gary Horn.
I'm Justin Bishop.
And I'm the growth on your torso. My name is Todd A. Davis, and thank you for joining us for some much-needed therapy in this third entry of our series titled The New Flesh, the Body Horror of David Cronenberg.
Are you the torso growth, or like that guy's like neck thing, that like icky neck thing?
I like she opens the thing like wings and it's coming out of her.
So you're the fetus. You're her rage. You're the rage fetus.
I'm the rage. Fetus. Let me go ahead and update my profile.
No longer a writer comedian.
Right.
Just the rage fetus.
Just certified rage fetus. That is a actually great bio for your
certified rage fetus.
Oh man, what part did we say? This is part 3.
Yep,
part 3 of 6.
3.
So after this, we'll be halfway through this series on David Cronenberg. Obviously not his entire filmography, because he's got about after this series is done, there's probably another 10 Cronenberg movies that we could talk about, and we probably will one day down the line. But we got other things to move on to after this, so we'll revisit him. But yeah,
it's bumming me out. I'm really digging the guy. I never realized how much I liked him.
Yeah, I'll be honest. I'm probably going to continue watching more David Cronenberg movies once this series is done, just to keep the train going. Because I like the vibe. I like the vibe of his movies. They're incredibly unique. I think there's something about them. I mean, regardless of like the plot, they just don't feel like anyone else's movies. Like they're kind of dry, but not in a like boring way. I don't know how to describe it. It's like, because it really is just like a visceral feeling that feels very unique.
I was only familiar with The Fly onward, so this has been really interesting for me just to see kind of how it started to see.
Yeah.
So this is watching like the origins of, and
we're kind of leading up to The Fly, which is, I mean, he does some other movies before then that were successful as far as mainstream audiences go, but The Fly is definitely the culmination of that. So it feels like everything we're doing between now and then is kind of him working his way towards that.
Right. And like hearing his background and how he approaches it, it kind of watches. I think there's an element of it watching with a scholastic feel to it. Not, I don't want to say it's like sitting in a classroom, but like, I feel like it opens your mind to some maybe pseudoscience, but maybe more fringe science of like, hey, this is, these things are out there, but not too far out there.
Yeah.
But
It's like, it's fringe science in that it's completely made up.
Right.
It's completely made up science, but it feels grounded in like it could be, but no, it's just sprung from his demented mind.
Yeah. And I think that's what's fun about it, because I think it lends stuff like that, ends a level of credibility to your narrative. And so I think it helps suck you in a little bit more.
Yeah. All right. So after the success of those first couple of low budget features, we kind of talked about this a little bit last week, but he had become a bankable director. He was making movies that made money. They were low budget movies, but they made more money than they cost, and they ended up being a return on investment for the people who invested, which in the case of those first couple movies happened to be the Canadian taxpayers and the Canadian government. So he had kind of started to get this reputation as being dependable and professional. And if you've seen interviews with him, like you would never think that this is the guy making these kind of disgusting movies, because like I think we might have mentioned it when we talked about him and Martin Scorsese meeting, but Martin Scorsese said that he expected him to look, like a crazy person, and he looked more like a gynecologist from Beverly Hills. So this is kind of the reputation he's getting, though. He's a professional. He's very polite. He's very good at his job, and his movies make money. This is a guy that you can depend on. If you're going to finance one of his movies, the movie's going to turn a profit. So that puts him in kind of a unique position after the release of Rabid, because in Canada in the late 1970s, everyone suddenly wanted to invest in films thanks to this newly installed tax shelter law. So the years between 1975 and 1982 are kind of known as the tax shelter era, a time when filmmaking in Canada began booming because the federal government allowed investors to deduct 100% of their investment in Canadian feature films from their taxable income.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. So
wow.
Anyone who had the money to invest in it are going to do it, because that's a huge tax break. And so this new law results in a massive increase in Canadian film production. So to give you an idea, in 1974, 3 movies were produced in Canada as like Canadian films. Mm-hmm. By 1979, that had increased to 77 films.
Holy
just
shit.
in the year 1979. Now compare that to America. Around the time, America was doing about 90 to 100.
Okay.
Which still, though, that's, I mean, the population of America is vastly bigger than Canada. It's a lot of trees in Canada, a lot of moose.
Are moose allowed to make films in Canada?
During this period,
they don't have a lot to invest, honestly. So for a film to qualify for this, it had to be at least 75 minutes long, so feature length. It had to have at least one producer and 2/3 of the above the line creative team who were Canadian, which means the director, the writer, like the upper members of the crew. And at least 75% of the production and the post-production had to be conducted in Canada. And there were a lot of good movies that were made during this time. There were a few good movies that were made during this time as a result of these new laws. You've got Ivan Reitman's Meatballs, which was a huge break for him. It obviously eventually led to him doing Stripes and then doing Ghostbusters. So Meatballs was a big deal. Paul Lynch's Prom Night. We all know Prom Night, the slasher movie with Jamie Lee Curtis. Peter Medek's The Changeling, which is another outstanding horror film. And Bob Clark's Porky's. I don't think Bob Clark was Canadian, but he was working in Canada for most of his career. These films were all created under this tax shelter system. As you can imagine, there were also a lot of movies that were produced during this time that were just hot garbage, stuff that was filmed quickly and sloppily, basically just to make a little bit of money, and basically as just nothing more than a tax shelter.
I bet there has to be like a movie about this time that's kind of like The Producers, but part 2.
There should be.
So instead of them dealing with like the Nazi guy, it's just like them dealing with Canadians and trying to get the
it's
tax
like Strange Brew, but The Producers.
Yeah.
That's good. Good.
Well, these were films that were the results of like doctors and lawyers and dentists who were less concerned with making art than they were with just a tax dodge.
There it is.
So there was a lot of garbage movies, and a lot of them didn't even get distribution.
Yeah. So to be like really clear, I mean, it was like they were basically, these people were just like coming up with all this money, and they just needed to get rid of it so they didn't have to pay taxes on it. So they dump it into a movie. They're just like, whatever, just put it in something. Now you can't tax me on this thing. It's busy. The money's tied up. It's a period that didn't last very long.
It was like 5 or 6 years.
Yeah. I think by 79, investors and accountants and all of those people had figured out how to game the system, and they were just pumping out any kind of shit they could.
Trash.
And but the one thing we can say for sure is that it definitely did give some opportunities to people like David Cronenberg, who's been learning on the job here and he's about to enter another weird period after Rabid, where he's like 2 years off from a movie or something, but then this shit kicks in, and now he gets to spit them out left and right if he wants to. He even
which is exactly what he did. He was making them pretty quickly. So
even if the studio's not going to use them really or distribute them.
Because a lot of them got little to no distribution, especially outside of Canada. If they got any distribution, they were getting distributed there, but some of them barely even got that. And this was also true of David Cronenberg's next film, the film that followed up Rabid, which is a movie called Fast Company. Fast Company was released we're towards the tail end of this tax shelter era. This is 1979. It was made specifically for the American B-movie market. It stars American B-movie actors. There is an abundance of red, white, and blue I think it's actually technically set in America, although it was filmed in Canada, of course. But the film was hardly ever released and it never really made a profit, which the investors didn't care because it was a tax break for them. They didn't care if it made any money or not. It didn't have to make any money for them to get a tax break. And I watched Fast Company leading up to this because I had never seen Fast Company. We're not going to do an episode on it, but I did want to watch it just because I was curious, how it felt like as far as how it fit into Cronenberg's career. And Fast Company, it's fine. Like, it would be probably a very forgettable film if it had been made by anyone else. But since it's directed by David Cronenberg, I kind of view it as a fascinating oddity, a weird outlier in his filmography. And it's a surprisingly commercial film, like in the way that it feels. Obviously, it didn't make any money, but it feels like a commercial film that's just sort of dropped smack dab in the middle of this weird body horror phase of his career.
Would you equate it to the Canadian version of American Graffiti?
No, this is more about professional drag racers.
Okay.
So it is about car culture, but in a very different way. There's none of that nostalgia shit that's in American Graffiti. This is very much a drama about race car drivers.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. It's notable, though, as a part of the discussion on Cronenberg's career because of the team that he had assembled behind the scenes on this one. It marks the first of 4 collaborations with actor Nicholas Campbell, who we're going to see again in The Brood. It also marked the first time he worked with a cinematographer named Mark Irwin, who would go on to shoot 5 more Cronenberg movies after this, including every other movie that we're going to talk about on this particular series on Cronenberg's career. It was also the first of Cronenberg's film to be edited by Ronald Sanders. Sanders would go on to edit every Cronenberg movie from here on, except for The Brood. Presumably because The Brood was made so quickly after this that he was signed on to another film, because he did have another 1979 credit. It was also the first time that Cronenberg worked with an art director named Carol Spire, who's also stuck with the director for nearly every movie that he's made since 1979. Costumes were designed by Delphine White, who would also end up doing the costumes for Scanners and Videodrome. I think she gets replaced later on in his career by his sister, I believe. Denise Cronenberg starts designing costumes for him. So you've got all these people who, we're not going to talk about Fast Company really, but it's important to kind of note because almost all of these people behind the scenes, all these crew members are going to work on The Brood. From a career perspective, it was an important step in his career, So while it may not have had a huge impact on the film industry as a whole, it did have an impact on his career because of this team that he'd built together. And it wouldn't take long until this group of people started working with him again, because his next film was released less than 3 months after Fast Company. And it's widely considered by most critics to be Cronenberg's first truly great film. And that, of course, is the subject of today's episode. We're talking about The Brood.
They come from the unknown, and they're here now, hiding, waiting to strike. You can feel their presence all around you. Never before have you come this close to the edge of terror. Never before have you faced anything so strange and sinister, so bizarre and unnerving. Never until now. David Cronenberg's The Brood.
Are you ready for me, Frank? I seem to be a very special person now. I'm in the middle of a strange adventure.
I want to go with you wherever you go.
Do you?
Yes.
Then look!
The Brood. You can run. You can hide and hope they won't find you. But you won't escape. Once unleashed, The Brood will destroy anyone who gets in their way. David Cronenberg's ultimate experience in inner terror, starring Oliver Reed and Samantha Eggar. The Brood. They're waiting for you.
I actually watched Fast Company as well. And
did you?
Yeah, I did. And it's weird as hell. And not like that it's bad. It's just
it doesn't feel like a Cronenberg movie.
Yeah, it's
No,
just
it's
nothing
pretty-
like what you'd think of.
Yeah, except for that scene where the guy pours motor oil on the girl's titties. That feels kind of Cronenbergian.
Sure. Yeah. But it's all like car chases, fist fights, fast cars, and fast women. That's what this movie's about.
See,
It's a fine movie.
I watched Speed, and that's not the same movie.
There's no.
It is not. No.
Although I
Keanu in this
kind
one.
of was hoping someone would pour motor oil on Sandy Bullock, but
On Sandy.
yeah, but not like in a sexual way.
Sandy.
Just kind of like, all right, shut up.
Yeah. This
Stop yelling, repeating every line of dialogue in this movie.
No big dogs in this movie. I mean, it has like a nice little B movie cast, like William Smith and Claudia Jennings, John Saxon, all of that stuff, but no like highly evolved parasitic creatures.
No, there's nothing like that. No horror at all.
Unless you count the pit lizards.
Yeah. Well, this also, we mentioned it a little bit during Rabid, but Cronenberg also has a lifelong fascination with cars and like race cars, and he's a gearhead, So it did kind of, even though he didn't write the script to Fast Company, it did kind of play into some of his other obsessions outside of like science and the mind and things like that he explores in all of his other horror films.
I was thinking about just now like the pit lizard thing. There's like lot lizards. I think everybody's heard of those, like for truckers. And then we started watching Yellowstone, which is fantastic, by the way. Yellowstone's so good. But for the rodeo, they have buckle bunnies, and so that's find that interesting. So I was thinking, well, what do we call the women we deal with as podcasters?
There aren't any. No woman has ever been attracted to a podcaster.
Whatever. I don't know what circles you travel in, pal, but people hear podcast and panties drop. I call them listen lizards.
Nah.
I'll think of it by the time we're done.
I was going to say
Mike Meetses.
Pod pussies.
Pod tarts.
See, I was thinking pod pussies, but I was just kind of like,
He's like, I'm not going to say that. I said it for you, Todd. You're welcome.
Thank you.
Sound sluts.
Hey, there you go. That'll work.
We have gotten off track.
But okay, so seriously though, Fast Company is the best looking movie though. That was the thing that stood out to me, like coming off Rabid and Shivers. So all these people that are going to come with Cronenberg. I mean, speaking of Yellowstone,
it looks the most professional.
Yeah, like speaking of Yellowstone, it looks like Yellowstone has like a movie pilot. It feels like it could be like that. It could have been a series or something. Like it was. Yeah. It's just kind of a straightforward story, but. Man, I really did like the cinematography and everything, and was thinking about that. And then just Cronenberg, like, good for him. He's got steady work. He gets to shoot 2 movies back to back, and getting to do a movie about car racing. So you feel good for him.
He's getting a paycheck too. Yeah. So when Cronenberg was approached about writing another script that could be developed into a genre film, he didn't really have a story in mind. So he just starts writing. And when he started writing, he says the story just pushed its way right up the typewriter. This is a quote from Cronenberg, by the way.
Of course it is.
Says, I really don't think I had any choice. It was like automatic writing. It's my most autobiographical script, and I was very compulsive about writing it. And the reason that the script kind of flowed out of Cronenberg the way that it did is because it was his way of processing a particularly nasty divorce and custody battle that he had gone through while shooting Fast Company. Cronenberg's always been pretty open about the origins of the script to the Brood. He talks about it in almost every interview that mentions this movie. They get onto this subject. He even goes so far as to refer to the Brood as his version of Kramer versus Kramer being the Dustin Hoffman, Meryl Streep film that's also about a couple going through a divorce. Cronenberg says that his version was much more realistic emotionally. Where is that anger, that rage, that desire to kill? That's what he says about Kramer versus Kramer.
I saw like in a quote from, I think that book you had, the Cronenberg on Cronenberg book. Yeah. Like he says something like the Brood got to the real nightmare, horrific, unbelievable inner life of the situation.
Yeah.
I'm not being facetious when I say I think it's more realistic, even more naturalistic than Kramer versus Kramer. I felt that bad. It was that horrible, that damaging. That's why it had to be made then. It wanted to be made full blast.
Yeah, it's almost like he could not help it. Like he said, he was compulsive about writing it. It was almost like he had to purge all of these emotions. onto the page. And Kramer versus Kramer, I think it came out actually after The Brood, the same year, 1979, but Cronenberg knew of its development and he was familiar with the novel that served as the source material for the movie, because that had been released a couple of years earlier. So in response, he knew that this was coming and he's like, this is a very unrealistic version of a divorce, at least from my perspective. So he starts working on a screenplay for The Brood, depicting the strife between a divorced couple battling over their child, but in a much more Cronenbergian way.
Of course, he had to get his rogue scientist in there, and
of course, you got to get that.
All of that stuff, and weird kids in snowsuits that beat the shit out of people with anything they can pick up, and
toys and mallets. And
it's kind of interesting though, because a lot of these people, when you see them talking about it, like the people that worked on the film, like coming off Fast Company, and then this, they seem like they're kind of evolving themselves and feel like they kind of hooked up with Cronenberg at the same time. So you can see that like camaraderie there. Like I saw an interview in Sci-Fi Now with Mark Irwin, he's the director of photography, and he said, quote, David seemed to be hitting a new stride because up until then it had been kind of gooey horror films. This was the first stand-up one, which was more dramatically based and not so special effects based. I think he was coming of age like the rest of us.
Yeah, I mean, because the special effects, like the body horror aspect of this movie doesn't really come to light until the very last couple scenes of the movie.
Right.
It's all a mystery of what's happening up until then. So when it came time to cast the film, Cronenberg says that he actually deliberately cast the main couple. He deliberately cast actors as the main couple who were vague physical facsimiles of himself and his wife. Although I don't think the guy who plays Frank really looks like Cronenberg, but he wanted him to kind of be the same kind of random white Canadian dude, I guess. So casting that lead role of Frank was a Canadian actor named Art Hindle, while an English actress named Samantha Egger was cast as the wife, as Nola. And then in the role of Hal Raglan, that's the doctor, the psychologist who's treating Nola, Cronenberg cast a guy who I love, Oliver Reed, great British actor. And Egger and Reed, they'd actually grew up together. They grew up like in the same British town, and they had worked together before. In 1970, they co-starred in a film called The Lady in the Car with Glasses and a Gun. Which I've never heard of, but these are two well-respected British actors. Well, she was well-respected. He's
we gonna go in on Oliver Reed. I know we are.
He's a bit of a wild card. We'll get into it in a minute. Yeah,
he's something else. But they had
so watchable though. Like,
God, he's awesome.
Yeah,
I would take back my statement from last episode about Cronenberg and his leading men. If he were the leading man, I mean, he kind of is, but
But I'd say what you said about leading men for the previous two movies still applies to Frank.
Yeah, I agree. But yeah, supposedly he and Egger, Oliver Reed and Egger, or when they would work together before, they had a romance. I was reading a little bit about that. Yeah, and it was kind of they called it a jilted romance. And he would go to her hotel room at night and like knock on the door. And I think it was Irwin again, in one of his this quote, he said, what was interesting about the tension between Egger and Oliver Reed was that they had, as it turned out, a history. They'd come to fruition and gone their separate ways. And now Ollie, in his nostalgia, among other things, decided he wanted to rekindle that every night. I don't think she felt the same way.
During the filming of this movie.
Right. He said, so it was very evident on set that she wasn't interested. They would go on to say, like, maybe it worked out for the best, that there was uncomfortableness between the two of them.
Yeah. I mean, they couldn't have gone on for very long because as we'll discuss, she was not on set for very long. So with The Brood, Cronenberg was given his biggest budget yet, about $1.5 million on this one, which allowed him to cast name actors like Egger and Reed. But the tax shelter law stipulated that the film could only have 2 non-Canadian actors, and one of them had to be paid less than the main Canadian actor. The main Canadian actor in this case, I guess, being what's his name, that played Frank. Oh shit, I forgot his name already. Art Hindle. Art Hindle. I've watched so many interviews with this guy. You'd think I'd remember.
That just shows you exactly the point we were making earlier.
Right. So presumably Egger was the one to have the smaller payday, not Oliver Reed, of the 2 non-Canadian actors, because her role only required her to be on set for about 3 or 4 days, which of course would have kept her fee a lot lower.
Also, Oliver the patriarchy.
Oh yeah, that too. Yeah. let's not forget.
In the interview on like the Criterion, she actually says like it was Monday through Thursday, because she said she was like filming Fantasy Island at the time, and she would go from like on the show she was marrying Ricardo Montalban, and then she had to fly out immediately after shooting into 38-degree Canada and bust ass till Thursday next to Oliver Reed and back for the next weekend. Yeah, she seems like one of those people though that like tries to have fun. Like she talks about being on all these different movies that she got to do, but with the opportunity popped up to do a musical, she's like, oh, I want to do a musical. And then it's like, if it's a sci-fi movie, oh, I'd like to do a sci-fi or a horror movie. Let's do that.
Yeah. So Oliver Reed. This is a guy who I hope we'll talk about him more on this show one day, more of his movies, that is. Most modern audiences probably know him best as the old gruff gladiator trainer named Antonios Proximo in Ridley Scott's Gladiator. That was actually his last film before he died, but it's a great memorable role, but probably his most high profile for most audiences here, at least here in America. But Reed, he'd gotten his start in genre films. His first significant role was in Sword of Sherwood Forest in 1960, which was a Hammer Films production directed by Terence Fisher. Terence Fisher was like Hammer's go-to guy, a legendary director. Fisher liked him a lot, so he also cast Reed in his first starring role, which was 1961's The Curse of the Werewolf, of course, another Hammer production. Hammer liked him. The suits at Hammer liked Reed a lot, so he ended up appearing in a bunch of their movies throughout the early 60s. And then throughout the 60s and 70s, Reed made several films with Michael Winner and with cult filmmaker Ken Russell, including Russell's infamous 1971 film The Devils. And I do want desperately to talk about Ken Russell on this show one day. I really want to do a Ken Russell series. He did Tommy, which also has Oliver Reed in it. He's just a fascinating director. Unfortunately, The Devils is hard to find. It's streamed on Criterion and on Shudder briefly over the last couple years. Like for a few months it was available, but there's no good physical edition of it. Like, I don't know what's going on with that movie, but it is very hard to find, but it is a fascinating film.
You really feel like we're in the age of like, no film should be hard to find.
Yeah. There's something with the rights, I think. And there's a lot of controversy regarding The Devil. So it's very possible that it's actually been deliberately suppressed. But it's if you ever get a chance to see The Devils, it's great, and Oliver Reed is on like another level in that movie. It's really outstanding.
Well, if they're out there suppressing it, I'm stubborn. That makes me want to see it. So.
Yeah. So I'm not going to go through Reed's like entire filmography here, but suffice to say, he was a pretty big star in England during this time period. There was even talk that Albert R. Broccoli and Harry Saltzman were eyeing him as Sean Connery's replacement as James Bond when Sean Connery was ready to leave the role.
He'd have made a decent Bond.
But that tells you how, especially when he was younger and he wasn't as hefty as he is in this movie. He may not have had. He's got a scar on his chin, which you can see in this movie. That might have even been before that. I think he was in a bar fight. I think he got stabbed with a bottle. In a bar fight.
Jeez. Seems like the kind of guy who would stir that up. Yeah, sure by this time, by the Brood time, he was already in the physical state of shaken and stirred. Doesn't matter. Just inject it into my veins.
Horrid, man.
Oh, there are some legendary stories about Oliver Reed. But so when he was cast in the Brood, he was kind of past the height of his career, but his inclusion in the film was still a major boon to the production. He was still a known guy.
Did you get the Criterion of this movie?
Oh yeah.
You watched him on the Merv Griffin show?
I didn't watch that.
Jesus, he's on there with Orson Welles.
Yeah,
and it is just, I can't believe it's like a podcast. Like, I can't believe that shows really just aired on television like this. But they're like supposedly friends, but they have like a very antagonistic way about them. Like,
I feel like both of those guys have that anyway. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, they're like sitting there and they're just like, you guys were just together in the Alps, right? They're like, oh yes, Mr. Wells and I, we hang out on a regular basis. Orson, it's good to see you. I'm surprised you pulled yourself away from the buffet table for long enough to be here. It looks like you've stored most of it in your ginormous gut, but it is good to see you nonetheless. And Orson Welles is just like, oh, Mr. Griffin, would you grab me a glass, please, to collect some of the sweat that is no doubt alcoholic seeping through Mr. Reed's veins right now?
Wasn't Charo on that same episode with them?
I think, yeah.
Oh my God.
That's so weird. That's what I'm saying. It's like it's just a weird, like, fucking peek into.
I might have to watch that later. I didn't have time to watch it, but because I didn't think that they would probably discuss the Brood that much during it.
They don't. No, I watched it thinking they
would. I was
they
most fascinated by
100%
Charo's inclusion on that episode. I want to see how she interacts with them.
One of these things is not like the other.
She ends up ranting some towards the end, and they just kind of stare at her. But it's mostly just like, for some weird reason, like Merv tried to make, I'm the happy guy between you two, making jokes, and these two that obviously feel like they're better than everyone else within like 1,000 feet.
Like the equivalent of that today is like Anthony Hopkins, Morgan Freeman, and like Sofia Vergara.
Even like Anthony Hopkins has got his thing about it. Morgan Freeman seems really likable all the time.
Yeah.
And, I don't know. These guys seem like they could not give less of a shit about you.
They probably don't.
Yeah, it's true.
So the most difficult part of the casting process for this film was finding the Brood itself, because Cronenberg could only find 2 Canadian actors who were small enough. He ended up using 10 7-year-old gymnasts from a school in Ontario who were apparently really disappointed to find out that the movie was rated R because they couldn't see it. And that, by the way, I'm talking about at the end of the film, the Brood, when there's like all of them attacking Oliver Reed, crawling all over him. Those are the 10 gymnasts. For the scenes where there's only like 1 or 2, the creature, the Brood, the rage creature, whatever you want to call it, was played by an actor named Felix Sela, who he had appeared in everything from Spaceballs to Batman Returns. He was one of the Emperor Penguins, Return of the Jedi. He also plays the stunt duck in Howard the Duck. That's literally his credit, is stunt duck.
Nice.
And he's short round stunt double in Temple of Doom.
Holy crap.
What a fun career.
Yeah.
But what I don't know is if he was in a Star Trek episode of any sort, Todd. Maybe you can shine some light onto that.
Yes, well, this week we've actually got some Star Trek royalty in this movie. That surprising. Most of the time we get 1, maybe 2, and it's usually like somebody did stunts or just had a walking by on the bridge type of role. But actually besides Mr. Cronenberg himself, Felix Sela, who plays the creature, he was in the Star Trek pilot in February 1965. He was in the cage as the Telosian. Now he was uncredited,
right?
But yeah, he was
in the very first episode of Star Trek to ever exist.
Exactly.
That's cool.
The pilot that was rejected by NBC.
Yeah.
Yeah, wow. He was in the cage. And then Miss Samantha Egger, who plays Nola Karavith, she was in Star Trek The Next Generation, season 4, episode 2, that was in 1990, the episode titled Family. Now, if anybody's out there familiar with that particular episode, it's actually considered to be the third part of The Best of Both Worlds, where Jean-Luc Picard gets assimilated by the Borg.
Yeah.
After the events of that whole 2-parter, which was huge in not just Star Trek history, but like television production history, the third part is this episode called Family. Wow. where the Enterprise is being repaired and space dock and everything, and he actually goes back to the family vineyard. He goes back to the Picard family vineyard, and there's his brother and his sister-in-law, Marie Picard, who is played by Samantha Egger. And it's wow. Honestly, if you watch Best of Both Worlds and Family as a trilogy, it's really great because you get to see Patrick Stewart's an amazing actor. If there's any question about it, watch Family. And it will seal the deal. Like, it is a fantastic episode, and she's wonderful in it.
That's awesome. I had no idea. I know I've seen that episode, but it's been decades, literally, probably since I saw it.
And
that's
like
cool.
for an extra little tidbit, like watch those 3 episodes right before revisiting Generations, because the storyline there from Family kind of ties into that movie, and it's a lot of fun, and it's a great.
That's cool.
One of my favorites. Yeah.
Anyone else, or
that's it?
I mean, if you're going to only have two, like those are two.
Those are really solid.
Those are pretty big entries. That's awesome.
Yeah,
that is fun.
Yeah.
So it comes time to start shooting the Brood. They've got their cast. They've got everybody ready to go. The film goes before cameras in Toronto. This time, they're not shooting in Montreal this time. They're shooting in Toronto, mid-November 1978, continued through the end of the year. And as we mentioned earlier, cinematographer Mark Irwin, our director Carol Spire, they returned to work with Cronenberg again after doing Fast Company with him. The editor on this one was a guy named Alan Collins, who has almost exclusively worked on Canadian films and definitely had some like exploitation movie cred, having worked on Night Call Nurses and Private Duty Nurses for producer Roger Corman, the latter of which, of course, starred Shivers lead Paul Hampton. We mentioned that on that episode. And one of the most notable contributors, though, to The Brood, in my opinion, is composer Howard Shore. Howard Shore is a legend, I think. I think he's a legend. He's the guy who provided the incredible scores for Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings films, which are some of my favorite movie scores of all time. If he had never done anything else other than those, he would be a legend in my book. But everything he does for Cronenberg is also just really incredible. And the Brood's fairly early in his career. He was kind of just getting started as a film composer. So a little bit about Howard Shore. He was born in Toronto, 1946. He began studying music when he was about 8 or 9 years old, kind of a child prodigy. He worked all the way through, middle school, high school, playing in the school bands and things like that. His first big break in his career, though, came in 1970 when he became the music director for a Canadian sketch comedy show called The Hart and Lorne Terrific Hour. That show was short-lived, but it began Shore's partnership with a fellow Canadian by the name of Lorne Michaels. And then Shore would, of course, go on to be the musical director for the first 5 years of Saturday Night Live from 1975 to 1980.
That really, I will not pretend to be the SNL savant that Justin's wife is.
Yeah.
But if you take a couple of episodes, find some of your favorite, celebrities and watch those episodes. First of all, they're a lot of fun to watch because it's kind of like a mad scramble to
those first 5 years are my favorite. It's my favorite era.
And the music is really interesting
really
too.
Good.
I feel like even though they've done some really big things, of course, here in the last 40 plus years, it was kind of more open, if that makes more sense. They weren't like in a box. I feel
it also felt a little bit more underground because it was.
Yeah, you're absolutely right.
So it was during that time that he was doing Saturday Night Live, during that 5 years, that he started writing his first film scores. His first one was a low-budget thriller called I Miss You, Hugs and Kisses, released in 1978. And then The Brood was his second film score. It was only his second movie. And it was the first of many, many collaborations with David Cronenberg. He has since, from The Brood on, he has scored every single film that Cronenberg has directed, with the exception of The Dead Zone. Wow. Every single one, all the way up till the one his last one, which I think was Mapped to the Stars. And I think he's doing the Crimes of the Future one that's supposed to come out later this year.
Yeah. And The Dead Zone was just because of his blood feud with Christopher Walken. I made that up.
Sounded credible, though.
Yeah. If you hadn't guessed.
So the film shoot itself took on an almost like guerrilla style because, according to Mark Irwin, it was because this atmosphere was kind of created by the need to finish shooting the film before the end of the year, because in order for the film's investors to count it on as a tax credit for that year, the movie had to be completed by the end of the year, or at least done shooting by then.
Yeah, they'd have to. Yeah, like Pierre David, the executive producer. I mean, he was the one who kind of got it made. It was like kind of uneventful. He just had it on his table, he said, but he was.
Because the guys at Cinepix like turned it down for whatever reason.
Yeah. And he said, you're not really worrying about funding at this time because investors were essentially just trying to hide their money in the film system. So you always got options, but he was, had somebody that was looking to sink some money into stuff. He sees The Brood and is like, man, this is good, if not better than literally anything else I have. So let's make this. And
so they start shooting it in November, and they've got until the end of December to finish it up.
Exactly. Yeah. So he says you got to hustle. He says Cronenberg was as organized as he'd ever seen through anything. So I think he goes on to they're going to work together for like 3 movies, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah. Yeah, that sounds about right. And Irwin also says that the shoot taught him a lot about shooting night for day, which is very unusual. We see a lot of day for night shoots in movies, especially lower budget ones. It always looks kind of crappy. Like it kind of looks like they lightened the scene, I think. But night for day it's pretty rare, at least I think. At least I'm not aware of it, maybe. But maybe it's just easier to do. I'm not sure. But the way that he would do this is he would shoot scenes that were clearly in the daytime. You know, a scene in front of a lake where you can see this full sky where you obviously can't hide that it's during the day. But even if they have to shoot a different angle for the same scene, but the sky wasn't visible, like let's say you've got your characters up against a wall, they would choose to shoot that later because the days in Canada are very short. This is winter. This is December in Canada. Very short time frame of daylight hours. So if they didn't have to shoot it during the day, they would push it off till it was dark, and then he would shoot night for day.
Yeah, which sounds like a real hassle. And they're like, like you said, guerrilla style, it's going all over. But Irwin says like he gets like a lot of people in shoots when he uses that trick, like later on, or how to organize those things. People are always like, how do you learn that? And he's like, you don't want to know.
It's not fun. It's not fun. But Mark Irwin, by the way, other than doing like Cronenberg films, go look at his filmography, man. It is, first of all, it's kind of all over the place, but he does a lot of horror movies, but he also does like Passenger 57. He did RoboCop 2. He did Scream with Wes Craven. He did New Nightmare with Wes Craven. He did several movies with the Farrelly brothers, like There's Something About Mary, Me, Myself, and Irene. He's like, if you look at his filmography, you've heard of every movie that he's shot. They're all, I mean, some of them are not great movies, like say Steel. but you've heard of them all.
It is someone's favorite movie.
It's Shaquille O'Neal's favorite movie, and nobody else's. You're gonna tell me that he likes Steel more than Kazam.
We were on the set of Steel, and he wanted to shoot.
Is that your Shaquille O'Neal impression?
I understood it. It made sense.
He wanted to shoot night for day, and I was like, well, all right, man, let's shoot him.
Love that he has a Shaquille O'Neal tucked away,
just ready to go,
available for parties, bar mitzvahs, corporate events.
His theme song should be Always Ready.
Yeah,
that's a reference to a conversation we had before we started recording this. So
it's gonna play great on the show now.
So other than having to kind of scramble to shoot these scenes, the shoot itself was fairly uneventful. But there was a little bit of drama caused by none other than Oliver Reed. So Reed, if you don't know a lot about him, he has a reputation as a raging alcoholic. It is a narrative that often overshadows his skills as an artist, as an actor. Like in almost every interview, like his drinking comes up because this guy like binge drinks. There are stories of him having parties where they drink 40 bottles of wine, like it's crazy. And his antics did cause some headaches for the crew of the Brood, especially what's his name, Pierre David.
They asked him about that. He said, quote, I had no idea what I was getting into when I hired Oliver Reed.
Yeah, the most memorable occasion happened when Pierre received a call that Oliver Reed was at the police station. He'd been arrested. He had apparently been out drinking at a restaurant, and he made a bet that he would walk to the hotel from the restaurant completely naked. So somebody bet him he wouldn't do it. He bet that he would, and he did. Which, of course, he's walking down the streets of Toronto buck-ass naked, and let's face it, hammered drunk, and the cops picked him up. Pierre David talks about picking him up at the police station, and he just had the police like all laughing at his jokes and stuff. He had entertained them, but it was kind of a hassle for him to have to go bail him out.
Excuse me, sir. RCMP here. We noticed your loonies and toonies hanging out, and we'd like you to come down to the station if it's not too much trouble. That'd be great.
So you mean to tell me that you're a police officer? My piss is harder than you.
Well, you're certainly entitled to your opinion, sir. I wouldn't dissuade you from that, but we're going to need you to come down to the station, please. And scene.
There was another time when he almost got kicked out of the hotel he was staying at while shooting the movie because he just started like throwing shit out of the window.
He was on like the fourth floor.
Yeah. And the hotel calls the producer. They're like, he can't do that. He can't just like throw shit out of his window. He can't stay here if he's going to keep doing that.
Mark Irwin said he said Ollie was not the kind of guy who would listen necessarily, but he actually did respect David Cronenberg very much because David Cronenberg had written the screenplay. And so
he also like, he is known by everyone who works with him. When it came time to work, he was very professional. You know, he was always on time, even when he'd been out drinking till the wee hours of the morning. He never showed up hungover, or at least you couldn't tell that he was hungover. He knew all of his lines. The actors and the crew all say that, you know, when it was time to film, he was a consummate professional.
Yeah, they said there were two people at first it was his bodyguard who was also a stand-in, and he would help him with his lines really closely. They said they would work back and forth. Irwin said whenever David would have script changes, Ollie would get he said RADA on everyone. I don't know what that means. Yeah. All right, good. He said Ollie would get very RADA on everyone. It turned out Ollie was dyslexic. So his smoke screen and that kind of bluff that he would call when there were script changes on the spot was to start screaming at everyone that they're an amateur. So that was nice. But yeah, and then when he was throwing the stuff out of the fourth floor, they apparently Pierre David called his agent and they were like, the hotel wants to kick him out. They said they can't keep a guest that does this. And Reed's agent said, then you have to call his brother. That's the solution for him. And he's the gatekeeper. He'll take care of stuff. And he said they did. And they brought in Oliver Reed's brother, Simon. And for some reason, he said Reed would show up on set every morning and be totally great. He'd get drunk at night, but was there a hangover? I don't know. He was amazing. He was funny. He was on target. He was nice. He was everything. At night, he was crazy. But after his brother showed up, we didn't get any more craziness on set. There's so many stories for him. Like if you look it up, I mean, I just saw like one with Patrick Warburton when I was just Googling Oliver Reed. And it was a quote from Patrick Warburton saying, he has a tattoo on his penis. I know this because he showed me the first day I met him. But they talked about like Art Hendel said, I remember introducing him to my mother-in-law at the time of the rap party. He was smoking a cigarette and he deemed that impolite, but he didn't have anywhere to put it. So he just put it out on his tongue and he ate it. Cindy Hines, her mother, she was one of the child actresses, said the mother had been given a gift by the crew members. She said the crew had gotten my mom a nice bottle of cognac, and after the party she went to get it, but it was missing. She asked where it was, and they said, oh yeah, Oliver got it. It's in his room. And it was gone.
Jeez. So one of the other notable members of the crew that I think we have to mention is the guy that was responsible for the film's prosthetics. And this was none other than yet another legend, Jack Young. We actually talked about him before. This is the guy who did the makeup effects for Tobe Hooper's Salem's Lot. So he had done, the Barlow mask on Salem's Lot, which that was actually the film that he did right after The Brood. But he had gotten his start back in 1939 doing uncredited makeup work on The Wizard of Oz. That was his very first job as a makeup artist. And he had worked on movies like Walking Tall and Apocalypse Now. And he didn't work for long after The Brood. I think he made 2 or 3 more movies after this before retiring. But yeah, another kind of legend that was working on this little fairly low budget Canadian horror film.
I'm going to say, that's not a bad resume.
No, Apocalypse Now. No, you're doing pretty good.
Yeah.
There was a lot of cool like effect stuff on this movie, just in general. Like I know I saw Eggers talk a lot about the the big final scene for her, like just the but it was like condoms. They had cut the tips off the condoms and filled it with, she said, I don't want to know what, but then they would like stick them to me in places and they were just having a good time with it. Like,
yeah, it's probably corn syrup and yeah.
Yeah, and well, yeah, and at least on the blood and stuff, it was the stuff that was weird to me, and I remember even saying this to my wife during the filming or during watching the film, was that the kids that were involved. I was always like kind of freaked out by like these little kids being around, like in the classroom scene where the teacher gets
killed. Yeah,
and I'm like, how, like that is fucked up, but
traumatizing.
Yeah. But Irwin says that it was purposefully jovial circumstances. He said David had his quote said David had a light touch when it came to that scene. Not that it was a frivolous scene, but he was aware of Candace's age, who was the same age as his own daughter. And so he was very light and playful with the kids. David and the first AD really went out of their way to ensure it wasn't portrayed as something lethal at all. When it's all cut together, of course it is, but the kids did not experience any trauma.
Yeah, I mean, that's the case a lot on these horror movie sets where, you know, what we see as the final product is vastly different from the experience on the set. A lot of times they're just having a lot of fun. People are joking around. It's all about how it's presented. You add the music, you add the sound effects, you edit it in a way. But on the day, it's, you know, it's not like you're actually seeing someone get murdered.
Yeah,
hopefully.
Except for being around Oliver Reed. Erwin says it was uncomfortable for the kids. The young gymnastic team of girls aged 5 to 8, they'd never been on a film set before, and Ollie was really loud and they were very frightened of him. What made it worse was the mask they had on would not come off easily, so they had to eat lunch with the mask on, so they were all just bent out of shape. But in the scene where Dr. Raglan goes in the bunkhouse to retrieve Frank's daughter Candace, he says they get agitated, they start jumping on him and stuff like that. Which apparently he enjoyed, but whatever. Anyway, it said the kids wanted nothing to do with Oliver Reed. He smelled like a distillery. He was yelling. These kids were not going to jump on him, much less attack or go near him. But the production team ended up having to address it by they darkened the set a lot, and they put shadows and panels carefully throughout the room that concealed their parents hiding behind them.
They were throwing them at
and so that the parents would take the kids and throw them onto Oliver Reed. And Oliver Reed would treat them like puppets, like they were attacking him. And he said the parents were very helpful. But he says when you look at the scene now, it's very choppily edited because it was hard to get things to flow very well.
I think it worked pretty well in the end.
Art Hindle also had a story about just another on-set thing. He was saying that he in the autopsy scene, he said we actually shot in an actual autopsy room in a real hospital where we look at the dead fetus of one of these things. We had finished what we intended to do, and David said to me, "Why don't we go grab a shot where you're coming through the door? Just go out that door, we'll frame it, and you come back in." So I went out there, I closed the door, and I'm waiting for action, and suddenly I felt kind of funny. I turned around and realized I'm in a storage room for corpses. So there I was waiting for action. And for some reason, there was a delay. They were tweaking lights or something. And it seemed like I was in there for hours.
I love the guy who plays the coroner or whoever it is that's doing the autopsy. I just love his line delivery.
I know I was hoping he would get more because he was very good.
Yeah, he's great.
But Art Hindle said they ended up that the famous line from Cronenberg on this movie was blood, more blood. He kept yelling that. And so by the end of it, he actually had the crew made T-shirts or as a wrap gift that say more blood. And they had blood dripping on it. But they said that it would be the blood would he would always yell that and it would splash everywhere. And it was made from corn syrup, like we were talking about. And the little girl, they said they would break for lunch. And then by that time, the blood on her had crystallized. So she couldn't even move. So they would have to peel her. They said she was like a candy apple, and she couldn't move. So they spent an hour trying to dissolve it with warm water to get her out so she could eat lunch and stuff.
Oh Lord. So Roger Corman's New World Pictures, they were actually responsible for distributing the film in the U.S. But when it came time to get a rating in the U.S., the MPAA demanded that some scenes be trimmed. Most notably, the scene at the end of the film where Egger licks the fetus that she's just birthed. The scene was actually Egger's idea. She conceived that on set the day that they were filming. She was kind of mimicking the behaviors of cats and dogs. She had a lot of animals at the time, when they give birth, they lick their kittens or puppies. And so that was kind of her thought process. But when the scene was censored, they cut the actual shot of her licking it out. Cronenberg said quote, I had a long and loving close-up of Samantha licking the fetus. When the censors, those animals, cut it out, the result was that a lot of people thought she was eating her own baby. That's much worse than what I was suggesting. And he's right, I think. I mean, that's a lot worse than what she was doing. But that's just, this, I feel like no matter what Cronenberg does, somebody's going to have a problem with something in one of these movies, at least until he becomes more of a brand name. But the film was released in North America on June 1st, 1979. It was a pretty modest success, bringing in about $865,000 over a period of about the first 10 days or so. By 1981, because this is back when movies would kind of roll out releases. By 1981, the film had grossed over $5 million. So it's doing pretty well. Nothing too crazy, but pretty well. Critical reviews were split, though, leaning kind of on the negative side, actually. Contemporary reviews, at the time that it was released. Leonard Maltin gave it one of his famous bomb ratings.
Whoa.
Yeah, he got a bomb from Maltin. It was a 2-sentence review from Leonard Maltin, and here's what it is. Edgar eats her own afterbirth while midget clones beat grandparents and lovely young school teachers to death with mallets. It's a big, wide, wonderful world we live in.
Ticket sold.
Yeah,
honestly,
for real.
Yeah, that honestly would make me want to see the movie. That sounds great.
It's so I don't want to say disingenuous, but it's like that's like a small part of this movie.
Yeah, it is. That's not what the movie's necessarily about. Roger Ebert called it a bore and said it was, this is a quote from his review, disgusting in ways that are not entertaining, as opposed, for example, to the great disgusting moments in Alien or Dawn of the Dead. And then he goes on to ask in his review, are there really people who want to see reprehensible trash like this? He also referred to it as an El Sleazo exploitation movie, which I personally think makes it sound super rad and like something I would want to see. But Roger Ebert didn't see it that way. I think Roger Ebert might have needed to take himself a little nap.
Oh, yeah. Him along with lots of critics on the internet. And so David Cronenberg, back then and now, he's bound to piss some people off.
But people on the internet are rarely wrong
or angry.
They're usually typing reviews at 3 a.m. and they should be taking a nap, is what's happening. This review says, a really sad attempt to make a movie. 90% just plain boring. Disjointed attempts to build drama and suspense failed miserably. Why does Hollywood put out this kind of trash? A really sick shrink makes all his patients even sicker. There's no continuity throughout the movie on which to build a plot. The last 8 minutes reveals that the wife, apparently abused by her mother and not protected by her father, can produce human mutants by some kind of weird hermaphroditic process. No connectivity. At the end, the weirded out daughter has a look in the last scene that opens the sequel door. Our only hope is that this movie is so bad that no one will attempt to make a sequel.
They didn't.
Yeah. This review says, just plain boring, totally overhyped, contains spoilers. That's the title of it. I don't know if they're saying the movie contains spoilers or their review does. Performances and direction as well as screenplay are just simply mundane. There's barely a shred of the sleek, polished talent we have come to recognize as David Cronenberg, and what we have instead is some sort of mishmash of some of the better aspects from classic American horror movies as seen through the obviously tired eyes of this writer-director. It's almost got the sense of isolation of The Shining, but there are too many incidental characters. It's almost got the same sense of murder by the numbers as Halloween, but lacks the decisive action of that movie. It's close to the stark imagery and sense of motherhood gone awry as Carrie, and even the lead actress bears a striking resemblance to Piper Laurie, but Samantha Eggar's performance is overblown. Makeup effects, too, are overambitious for the time and fail to create any sense of impact or drama, and they just look silly. Of course, you could say the same for The Exorcist nowadays, but where that film still has the incredible strength of Ellen Bernstein's and Linda Blair's performances, all of the Brood has to go on as some sort of deformed alien figures that hiss a lot. It's not good. In short, where a movie matters most, the Brood fails wholly to deliver, instead regaling us with 90 or so minutes of unfulfilling cinema. A note on the subtext, it's difficult to feel any sort of respect for the social commentary contained herein. Sure, topics like the state of the nuclear family and the negative effects of a mother's love are riveting things when handled properly. Unfortunately, with the package and presentation are so obviously hollow and overdone, who could care less about subtext? I couldn't.
That was
I only
actually
read that one because it was
remarkably-
extra long, and
It was remarkably well written, but everything they said was wrong.
That's what I thought too. Let's see. This is shorter, angrier ones.
Grace says, "Why would you make this when you could just save people a lot of time and money by simply saying you hate your ex-wife?"
That's a fair point.
Didn't get the point across quite the same way.
Sarah says, small spoiler, 1 star because of the brood babies. They whipped a very heavy ball at this guy's head, and I thought that was impressive. But the main guy had absolutely no personality at all, and I didn't like that, which ruined the rest of the movie for me. Desi says, despite having Oliver Reed playing a brooding asshole, deformed, murderous clone children that look straight out of Don't Look Now, a weird child actor who wears a prairie dress and unbelievable 70s decor and fashion, this movie is somehow really, really boring. On the plus side, it's only 90 minutes and the ending becomes extra demented when you know that this film was inspired by Cronenberg's divorce. My condolences to former Mrs. Cronenberg. And Matt Grillo says, the Brood is style over substance, ideas over story, and in the end, a lot of nothing. It's the first film I've watched this year where I felt I had wasted my time, where I actually gained nothing by watching it. It isn't even scary, which is the bare minimum a horror film should aspire to. Instead, the film's chief vehicle of terror is this gross out, which is the lowest level of horror. The character development is nil. We only learn what we're told. No one is dynamic. Everyone is sort of dumb in the kind of way an underwritten screenplay renders them. The atmosphere is cold, distant, but only in a way that makes the whole thing alienating. We can't really empathize with anyone. The plot isn't propulsive, muddling along only to conceal an idea which is neither very interesting or that plausible, if not vaguely misogynistic. There are some good attributes, but they're buried in the whole wretched mess of it. Oliver Reed's good as an ambiguously bad psychiatrist. The opening scene, a public therapy session, was to me the high point of the film, and that is it. And that was.
I love that opening scene that they talk about, because if you've never seen this, you don't really know what's going on. Like, is this some sort of like play? Like, what,
Right.
you know, it's really hard to tell what's going on until you kind of realize it, you know, as the scene progresses. But it really plays out almost like a 2-person play, because they're on a stage, they've got an audience, you know, and they're speaking as if they're playing parts, because Oliver Reed's character is playing a part of this guy's, you know, abusive parent. So it's a really great opening to the movie, I think, that makes you just like immediately you're a little
drawn
confused.
in. Yeah,
you're drawn
it definitely
in,
draws you in.
You're drawn in because you're curious as to what's going on, but you know, it's very intriguing. It's a really great way to start a movie, I think.
Oh, well, I just want to say I disagree with all those people. I like this movie a lot.
Yeah.
Like a lot. Like a lot. I like it a lot. I thought this
very,
movie
very topical impression there.
I was impressed by how much I liked this movie. I thought
It's a great movie.
Looked cool, and the atmosphere was great. And I get it, it's kind of slow, but I think
It's
pays
only
off
slow in that there's not a lot of like horror action. There's a lot of atmosphere, but it's not slow in that it's boring in any way. Now, if you're watching this and you're waiting for something to, you know, a bunch of like scary, you know, monster scenes or whatever, you're not going to get that. That's not the type of horror movie that Cronenberg makes. None of his movies are going to do that, but it's never boring. When people say something is slow, like some of these reviewers did, it makes me think that they were bored by it. A movie can be slow in moving the plot, although this one isn't. I mean, it's a mystery, you know, the whole time. I don't find it slow at all. I find it intriguing. It's just not scene after scene of like carnage, which is
it's
what
like
some horror fans
Shining.
want.
Somebody referenced The Shining in one of those reviews, and that movie's kind of slow, but
Yeah.
like it's I don't know. They seem to not think, I guess, that I think that their thing was like it's not atmospheric enough, like The Shining or something. I'm not going to try to like compare the two, but I thought this movie kept me interested the entire time, and I am tough to keep interested sometimes. I was into it, man. I really enjoyed it, and I enjoyed everything.
This was your first time seeing it?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah,
I thought I'd seen it. Like, it sounded really familiar, but watching it, I was like, no, I don't think I've ever seen this. These weird, because I didn't know what was happening with the psychoplasmics and whatnot.
It's another intriguing bit of made up science from Cronenberg, I think. And it's also, this one is, this is body horror. Yeah, we're talking about body horror, but this one also concerns the mind a little bit more, which is another fascination of Cronenberg's, especially in the way that the mind and the body are not two separate entities. I think that's something we're going to see a lot on Scanners next week, where the mind and the body are intrinsically linked. It's not like they're not. People often think of them as two separate things, but in Cronenberg's world, they are not.
Yeah, and it goes back to like the we kind of talked about it last time. Like the Oliver Reed's character is not, he's not evil.
No, he's not at all
necessarily. He's just another.
He's
messed up scientist.
Yeah. Kind of. No, so Todd, this was your first time seeing this as well. Is that right?
Yeah. This was a first viewing for me, and I, besides being drawn in by that first scene, it was a little slow, just because I was like, okay, we've got this family drama type thing, and there was a little bit of blood when the grandmother got bashed away, and I was just kind of like, okay, well, like, where are we going with this? But like, it's and I'm finding, maybe it's because I'm getting older, I don't know, I like a slow burn. Mm-hmm. Because I feel like sometimes those payoffs are just even better,
more worth it.
Yeah. And I think if the listeners will go back to when Justin and I did my horror movies, you'll find I really dig like the idea of like stuff in your mind is probably where most horror lies. Mm-hmm. It's not the monster, it's not the ghost, but it's kind of like what's happening in your own head, or the person sitting next to you who you've known for years who snaps, or whatever. Silence of the Lambs, stuff like that. Like, there's nothing more. Psychological horror, I think, is, again, I mentioned to the boys earlier about that, that little bit of credibility because of that, some of that science. When you get into the psychological damage of some of these people, I work at a law firm where we part of our thing is criminal defense. Well, we end up looking at evidence and stuff showing the fragile nature of the human experience, and how these things are so damaging and have not only long lasting effects on the person, but seemingly endless ripples in the water of their actions just rippling out and affecting so many things. So
you see that here, because like,
right,
not only is Nola possibly I don't think she's consciously abusing her daughter, but she comes from a damaged family. Her parents, their destroyed marriage and the way that they treated her, you're seeing the result of that. It's not just what she's doing, but it's what happened to her, right. So that's kind of those ripple effects that you're talking about.
Now, I will say, it sounds like I enjoyed this movie, but I don't think this might not even be like a once a year viewing for me. I don't think I like it as much as Gary does, but I enjoyed it. And again, I've had a blast with the Cronenberg stuff. Again, I'm looking at these early things as like the prequel to the rest of his career. And it's a lot of fun.
It feels like stuff really came together in this one. Like, all the way together.
And maybe that's because it was coming from a more personal place. Maybe. I mean,
except for poor Art Handle. Like it's still at this point, his like hero guys are buffoons.
Yeah.
So I don't even necessarily blame it on Art Hindle. I think he just what's he supposed to do? He's just he runs around looking clueless the whole time.
He was just written that way, So it's funny to me that someone like Roger Ebert called this reprehensible trash, because to me, this kind of ties into the way that we're discussing this. This is a movie made by a very thoughtful filmmaker. One who's trying to do more than just repulse people. Like he's actually, he's making horror, but he's doing it because he's got something to say. Whether or not you agree with what he has to say, or you using this as his avenue to do so is a different story. But to me, this is more emotionally realistic than most horror films, especially those that would be considered exploitation or El Sleazo exploitation, as Roger Ebert put it. This is from an emotional standpoint, it doesn't feel heightened. It feels real. I mean, even though it's obviously a very heightened situation. The Brood also feels like it's the third part. And there's a writer named Carrie Rickey. She wrote the essay that accompanies Criterion's release of the film. And she calls this Cronenberg's bioterror trilogy, Shivers, Rabid, and this. Each of these films features a male mad scientist who tests his new therapy on a female, which results in unintended and horrific consequences. All three of these movies start off that way. So we've only slightly touched on it during the last couple of episodes on Shivers and Rabid. We did mention it, but we haven't dug into it. But one of the critiques that Cronenberg often receives is that he makes misogynistic films and that he himself is a misogynist. And The Brood made for a pretty easy target for critics who thought this way. One of the critics who was the most outspoken about this was a guy named Robin Wood. I've got a great book. I've mentioned it a couple times of David Cronenberg interviews. And Robin Wood, I looked it up in the index, and Robin Wood is brought up no less than 7 times in different interviews, either by the interviewer or often by Cronenberg himself. And it's like Wood is his nemesis. This is his Lex Luthor. This is the joke. Robin Wood is the Joker to David Cronenberg's Batman. They're like, they're always butting heads. But nice. Wood, in his reviews, he said that Cronenberg portrayed his dread of women by creating monstrous female characters. But I don't agree with that, because I think that's victim blaming, because the women in these films are the guinea pigs that the male mad scientists use in their experiments. None of them ask for this to happen. The men experiment on them pretty much against their will. I mean, what Oliver Reed's doing is, yes, she's there for therapy, but the result is not what she went there for, but it's the men's actions that turn the women into monsters. The women themselves aren't evil at all. It's the male scientists who have inadvertently transformed them into monsters. Nola, even in this, I don't think Nola is even fully aware that her brood is out killing people. I don't think that she ever really knows it until maybe the end of the film.
Yeah, it never. It kind of implies that she doesn't know. It's so weird. Yeah.
So the idea that Cronenberg is a misogynist doesn't play to me, because the women, even though they are transformed into monsters, they are also some of the more sympathetic characters in the films. I think Marilyn Chambers' character is probably the most sympathetic in Rabid, but I guess the exception could be Juliana, Nola's mother in this. She's kind of portrayed as a monster. She's a alcoholic. She abused her kid. This is a story about Cronenberg's divorce. It's a story about divorce and about failed relationships, but it's also about generational trauma. This is a story not about one failed marriage, but about 2, Nola and Frank, and Nola's mother and father. And it's also about how the ramifications of her parents' failed relationships scarred her, both physically and emotionally, and about how, and kind of about how the deterioration of Frank and Nola's marriage is doing the same thing to their kid, to Candy. It's because at the end we see she's got that rage in her as well. We see those boils popping up on her at the end of the movie. This is about generational trauma that the cycle has not been broken yet.
That was well said, Justin.
Yeah.
Thanks, Gary.
Almost like you had 3 weeks to think about it.
Yeah, right.
I purposefully skipped over most of the reviews, like in the NAP stuff that talked about the misogyny part of it, just selfishly.
Yeah, but it does come up a lot, and it came up a lot at the time of its release. I mean, when Robin Wood curated a festival, I think it might have been the Toronto International Film Festival, he was doing this genre program there, and he wrote an essay to accompany the like a program with essays where he wrote negatively about The Brood, even though he was showing it at the festival. And then he invited Cronenberg to come, and Cronenberg knew their attitudes, and he showed up anyway, because he does not back down.
Nice.
He really
Nice.
doesn't. He is staunch in his opinions about his own films.
I wonder if the shifting gears. I wonder if Roger Ebert saw this as kind of the Kramer versus Kramer, because I'm curious as to his review of Kramer versus Kramer, and juxtaposed with this.
Yeah, that I don't know, but I mean, vastly different films, obviously.
Art's so weird because you got to be careful to like how you present these ideas and that sort of thing. But I mean, also you can't constantly expect somebody to, what's the way I want to put this, like dilute their emotion, like if they're creating something like this. I mean, he probably is angry, like you said. Where's the murderous rage and all this stuff,
this film is the shape of David Cronenberg's rage. This is it. This is his rage manifested, but better to write it into a movie than to physically do something.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's that way. It's like it's convenient sometimes for people to think that like it's I don't know, even like music or something, like somebody's getting something out or telling a story in a song, and then they think that that's real life. And like sometimes it's okay, sometimes it's not. Sometimes you can say stuff in a song, and sometimes you can't. And it's like, man, it's like you said, better it's in the song or in the movie or than anywhere else. And people have real feelings. Everybody's had feelings of doing something that you don't do.
Yeah. And Cronenberg's even said, and we talked about this, I think, on our last episode, but just because he writes a character a certain way, just because he's writing Nola or Juliana a certain way, that's not a stand-in for every woman on earth. It's that character. And maybe it's partially based on his feelings for his ex-wife, because they had a pretty contentious divorce. They had a custody battle. It was messy. It was not pretty. And this is him putting all those emotions out there. It doesn't mean that he thinks that all women are monsters.
Yeah, well, and this is his view on that, especially at an angry time. So it's like, and then sometimes you're pissed off and you think things. So he's supposed to be dishonest about his feelings or how he sees the situation. It's I'm not advocating for like people feeling like they should get racist if they feel that way, but no,
don't do that. That's right. Please fight those urges.
I don't know. I'm just saying, like, art's supposed to be like, you're supposed to be able to express these things. That's the whole point. And you got to be open to, like, sometimes that's part of it. Sometimes there's going to be shit you don't like. And that's just the way it is.
Yeah, but even as a horror film, even without digging into all of that subtext, like, I think The Brood works like gangbusters, because like we said, it is very compelling. The idea of psychoplasmics what a concept, like, to just spring out of somebody's brain. What a concept to come from David Cronenberg. Like, what a cool idea. And the idea that it doesn't always work the same way. Like, the one guy got the thing on his neck, it causes cancer in some people. The one guy gets boils all over his body, and then Nola creates external fetuses that that act out of her every emotion. It's an insane concept, that the idea that it's not really, there's no basis in some sort of mythological monster or anything like that. Like, so many horror monsters are based on some folklore or some other idea that's a little more grounded in something that we know. I've never seen anything like that concept, not prior to this, at least. So
almost like a modern folklore, like you're getting into what will be, dealing with the science of it and just how close to possibly being real it could be. Yeah, the more I'm thinking about this too, like I love I think his women characters are really interesting.
I think Nola is incredibly interesting. I think she gets murdered, but the school teacher is a very likable character. She's probably the most likable character of the whole movie, honestly.
Yeah, and I'm thinking back to like Shivers and Rabid too. Like, I think some of those are really good. I don't know. Yeah. It's just it's this one though, going back to what you were talking about, is the first one, it felt like he really nailed that he does understand horror movies, despite what some of those reviews I read said. Like, I mean, this has straight up horror movie scenes and and like slasher murders, not slasher necessarily, but you get what I'm saying.
And I think all of his movies could also be, or all of the movies that we're talking about on this series, at least, could also be classified as science fiction, because they all have a basis in science. This is sci-fi horror. Every single one of these,
absolutely.
Every single one we're talking about on this body horror series, every one of his films that is considered body horror could also be considered science fiction.
Yeah, right. Yeah, you're absolutely right.
And he does go on to make like Existence, which is a straight up sci-fi movie. Like he does do sci-fi, but he's not one to be pigeonholed. And like I said, on a previous episode, he doesn't write horror specifically. He just writes, and whatever genre takes shape is what he goes with. But he just happens to write some pretty horrific stuff.
Yeah.
So let's get into the section of the before we wrap things up, where we talk about our further viewing picks for this episode. If you're gonna pair The Brood with another film, what is your further viewing on this one? For people who are interested in The Brood, what else would you recommend to them?
Well, I've got 2 picks here, so it depends on kind of how you want your evening to play out.
I'm always so excited for
where's Todd gonna go with this,
because I never know which direction you're headed.
So, because The Brood is, I think we've all mentioned it at some point, a bit of a slow burn. If you want to juxtapose it with something a little more, a little faster paced, but still with that very odd family dynamic, I would actually go with Frailty. I think that would be, it's a great movie anyway, but I think, the idea of families and the structure of families, and especially in Frailty, like the father's personality over the children and influence on the children in this very it's a high concept thing for a child to grasp, and and of course the ripple effects from that are what fuel the movie.
Well, that movie also is very much about mental illness.
Oh yeah,
as this movie is, and it's also very much about generational trauma, because of the way that Bill Paxton's actions affect his son, which of course I'm not going to spoil the twist at the end of Frailty, but if you've seen it, you know where I'm going with that, and how his actions affect the next generation.
Right. The other one I had in mind was Hereditary. Just again, that
Same
family
thing.
dynamic, generational trauma, big rippling effects, maybe not in the science realm, but more in the supernatural realm. And
Hereditary was actually my pick as well.
Oh, was it?
For the
Oh,
same
sorry,
exact
man.
reason. No, that's great. I love that we're on the same page, because it's the same thing. It's once again, it's about mental illness.
Yeah.
Once again, it's about multi-generational trauma and multi-generational abuse, not just mother to daughter, but grandmother to daughter to daughter.
Right.
Just like in this movie. So we're on the same page, Todd.
Yeah.
That doesn't happen often.
Mark it down. It's a red letter day.
My other one would be Hereditary would be my main one. I think that would make a great double feature with this. I think Rosemary's Baby as another movie that kind of deals with motherhood in a really interesting way.
Yeah.
And also Rosemary's Baby is just fucking great. Anyway.
Right. Yeah. It's again, just a good movie.
Oh, it's so weird. I went like a totally different direction.
All right.
I just feel
Look
like
who's talking.
Yeah. I was like, you were talking about family, mental illness and like familial issues. Look who's talking. The baby fucking talks. Somebody's crazy.
Or somebody thinks that the baby's talking. John Travolta.
Right. No, I was just thinking like movies that like kind of feel the same to me, I guess. And so I was thinking of stuff like I was going like horror, like just straight horror movies, like Basket Case and From Beyond. Like movies where there's like Basket Case, because there's the idea that this like fucking weird growth and it also is a killer and all of these weird things, and then or he's not a growth in Basket Case, is he? What's the one where he's a growth?
Oh, that's brain damage.
Brain damage, yeah.
Basket Case, he is a he's his brother.
Your twin. So so it does feel like he's got the familial thing. But then like From Beyond, I don't know, something about the Lovecraftian thing, like just it's a little sciencey. It tries to be. It goes into like just alternate dimensions and making you fucked up because you see crazy stuff and then crazy. I don't know. It just felt like it'd be fun at the same time.
Sure.
Nice.
So for his follow-up to The Brood, Cronenberg would actually revisit an earlier script. This is one that he had been working on after Rabid, like before he had been inspired to write The Brood, inspired, of course, by his divorce. And that film, it would end up being Cronenberg's biggest success outside of Canada, and kind of brought his trademark brand of body horror to mainstream audiences for the first time. The film in question is, of course, Scanners. And it's the movie we're going to be talking about on our next episode, starring, of course, the great Michael Ironside. It has one of the most famous gore scenes in the history of horror cinema. And I am excited to rewatch it. I have also purchased Scanners 2 and 3 and Scanner Cop 1 and 2. So I'm just going to have a week filled with exploding heads. I cannot wait.
Son of a bitch. I feel like I got to keep up with
that. Nice.
So anyway, you guys got anything else?
No. Watch David Cronenberg on Star Trek Discovery.
Yeah, we'll just keep on rolling. We got 3 more episodes. We're halfway through this series, then we'll move on to something else. But 3 more episodes, that's another month and a half of Cinema Shock. So
nice.
Before we wrap up, guys, tell the listeners where you can be found on the internet.
Hey, if Star Trek is your thing, please join me for my show, the Computer Resume podcast, where I'll be covering the entire Star Trek franchise in chronological order for some reason, with a rotating panel of podcasters, comedians, actors, authors, family and friends, and the occasional Star Trek cast member. Available now wherever you get your podcasts, on all the socials at Computer Resume, and I am at Mr. Todd A. Davis on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Letterboxd, and D&D Beyond.
It's amazing that he just has that all memorized like that. It's
no way. I feel like Computer Resume is cruising for a bruising as Paramount just gets more and more amped up about Star Trek, and they're just going to start throwing stuff in. Yeah, and then you're just gonna I feel like you're gonna make yourself crazy because you're gonna
your timeline's going to get
chronological.
That's why I'm really nervous about the time, especially with the new show Strange New Worlds coming. I'm really looking forward to it, but there's part of me, like as a podcaster, going, oh, what the fuck am I gonna do?
Yeah, well, you might
mess up
have
my whole timeline.
You might have to play around with your format a little bit at some point.
Yeah, we'll see what we can do.
Just roll with the punches, Tom.
I'll tell you what you do is you get through this series whose name I already forgot.
Enterprise. The show that's named after the most famous spaceship of all time.
Right.
Yeah, that one.
That's again, and starring John Michael Higgins. And but no, like it just, I don't know. I feel like you should just go ahead and get through that so that you never have to talk about it again.
Yeah, just like ripping off a Band-Aid that takes 2 years to rip off.
I know. I actually
although it's probably going to grow on you, or maybe it already has. And
I mean, I just reached out to Shuttlepod Show and the Delta Flyers. Both of those shows are run by former cast members to see if I could host a crossover event between the two shows. I think that would be a lot of fun. But who knows? Maybe I'll kick Will Wheaton off the air and I'll take over the Ready Room.
Yeah,
I'm sure.
Good luck.
I'm sure.
Yeah. That's a very likely scenario.
Todd's covering. He's like the world's only Star Trek Enterprise podcast right now, and he's ready to take on Will Wheaton and his empire.
Right.
Gary, you tell people where you can be found.
This is Gary Horn on all this stuff.
Yeah. And I am at Justin_Bishop. You can find the show at Cinema_Shock. We are on Twitter. We are on Instagram. I am personally on Letterboxd. The show is not, but I do have lists of all the movies we've covered on Letterboxd and everything. So you can find that there, or at cinemashock.net. And you can find all the episodes. You can find our merch, links to our Discord, all that fun stuff there. As always, if you like the show, share it with somebody, share it with a friend, share it with anybody. Anyway, send them a link. Just tell them about it, whatever. Just get the name out there and give us some reviews.
You sound
all
desperate.
that stuff. I just want, people to enjoy what we're doing. I mean,
sound
people
like a
who
slut.
are you slut shaming me, Gary?
You're a whore.
Welcome to Cinema Slut.
You're a pod tart.
Cinema Slut is actually a great name for a podcast. That's going to be the offshoot of this show where we're only discussing softcore pornography.
There it is.
It's going to be like the late night Cinemax stuff, Red Shoe Diaries and all that shit.
Because the fans demanded it.
little did we know, we were trying to earlier in the episode, we're trying to come up with the name for that show. Listen Lizards or something.
Anyway, until we meet again,
may the wings of liberty.
Did you forget?
Yeah.
You want to take it again?
No, we're done. Be excellent to each other.
30 seconds after you're born, you have a past. And 60 seconds after that, you begin to lie to yourself about Johnny having the keys.
That's stupid. I thought you were going to do like Raglan's big speech at the beginning of it, in the Oliver Reed voice. And,
that wasn't one of the options on the IMDb quote.
I'm still waiting.
It's an option in the movie. You watched the movie.
I'm still waiting on you to do whatever Johnny Keys' actual, if he has a monologue somewhere. And
he doesn't. He does not get hired for his monologuing skills.
Well, it is one, and it is considered quite a log. So technically,
oh my god, this is awful.
We got to stop recording.
We're going off the rails.
Do you know who John Michael Higgins is?
Oh, I know that name, but I can't picture it. It's an actor, right?
Yeah, he's in Best in Show and
Perfect.
And
yep, I know exactly who you're talking about.
Yeah, that guy. He is in the newer Saved by the Bell. He's the principal of high school, and there's an episode in Saved by the Bell where he is upset with, they're having a class reunion, and Zach and Kelly and everybody are there, and he's mad at them, and they don't know why he's mad at them. And it turns out he's like, because you guys act like you don't even know me. And they're like, we don't, what are you talking about? And he's like, I hung out with you all through high school, and you guys pretend like you have no idea who I am. And they're like, you did not hang out with us in high school. And they call Lisa, and Lisa answers. And they were like, do you know so-and-so? And she's like, oh yeah, I freaking love that guy. He was so cool. Blah, blah. And they're like, what? Wait, did we know him? And then it starts flashing back. And they've inserted John Michael Higgins into all these famous scenes from Saved by the Bell. He's everywhere. In whole episodes of Saved by the Bell, and interacting with the cast. It's pretty clever. But anyway, they just don't remember him. He was just apparently that uninspiring as a person, and he is essentially a lead character in a David Cronenberg movie.
Are you saying because he is a forgettable white guy?
Yeah, he'll show up later and it'll be like, no, I was in a bunch of Cronenberg stuff. I was in Rabid.
I was really trying to figure out how you were going to link Saved by the Bell to David Cronenberg.
I went a long way to get there, but
I enjoyed the journey. That was a good journey.